A sudden outbreak of a devastating virus hit Seoul, impacting Yeonwoo's school trip. Yeonwoo, hopeful of connecting with his unrequited love, Soyeon, faces a crisis when unidentified cells transform infected individuals into ferocious beings. The classmates' Seoul sightseeing turns into a nightmarish ordeal. I know you love manga retellings, but only 12% subscribed. Hit like for the next episode. Meanwhile, everyone was gathered in the hall near the stage to make an important announcement. People sat down below the stage and listened intently. Two men wearing masks and yellow shirts said that new quarantine protocols had been issued and wanted to explain the details. He went on to instruct everyone present to keep their distance and avoid physical contact in order to avoid being infected by those whose symptoms of the frog egg virus had not yet manifested. Park Min and Ham Sung-yu were among the first to sit down, but they couldn't stop looking at their phones. But the phrase about keeping a distance outraged them. They began to be indignant in one voice and said that it was impossible because the room was packed with people. Suddenly, something distracted Park Min. He heard a notification from his phone and looked at it. He was followed by others. Everyone started receiving notifications on their phones and they took turns pinging. It looked like the connection was back. Ham Sung-yu shouted to his friend about the class group chat. There were to be many messages from classmates. They had the opportunity to contact their friends and adjust their course of action toward the shelter. Park Min opened the app and entered the group chat. There were quite a few unread messages, and all of them were negative. Someone said that they were all going to die, and another student asked about not being able to find anyone and called him. Someone also sent a rather scary video. Park Min was horrified by what he read. Shivers ran down his spine. Ham Seong-yu read that Seo Young and Cha Hyunju were safe because they were on top of Mount Namsan. The guy was sincerely surprised by the girl's action and commented that it was quite smart to go up instead of down. Meanwhile, behind them, Yeonwoo was quietly sitting and listening to the conversation. Ham Seong-yu was talking about his classmate, Tae-in. It seemed that he had also been infected. This information saddened and angered Seong-yu at the same time. He went on to comment on his death. Thane was a good guy, even though he had a lot of dandruff in his hair. Meanwhile, Jeonwoo's ears perked up. He couldn't miss any information about Soyeon and wanted to make sure she was okay and safe, but other thoughts also weighed on his mind. He could not forget that most likely someone among them was infected. His arm hurt for a reason. Someone had caused his pain. Park Min suggested counting all the surviving classmates. He wrote in a group chat to ask everyone to send in their location. But some of them didn't have cell phones. Suddenly, someone in the crowd wearing a blue t-shirt stood up and shouted at the workers in yellow shirts that the quarantine was useless. He said that someone was infected and they could not be calm in such conditions. He was supported by another man in a hoodie. He stood up and shouted that there were children here as well. He went on to threaten that if the workers did not take them to a safe place, the crowd would complain about them. But the man in the yellow shirt wasn't afraid. He said in a calm tone that he apologized for all the staff for the temporary inconvenience caused. He went on to say that the quarantine zone was already investigating the accident, so the audience had nothing to worry about. They were safe, as far as the situation allowed. The man in uniform continued that, based on an epidemiological study, an infected rat had entered the room. These words caught Jeonwoo's attention. He perked up his ears and listened intently. Meanwhile, his classmates were still on their phones. Yeonwoo ran the word rat over and over in his head. He found it quite strange and could not believe what he was hearing. Meanwhile, the worker continued to calm the crowd and said that the cause had already been identified, so they would try to make everything safer. Suddenly, Yeonwoo poked Isuri, who was sitting in front of him. The boy was very scared and asked if his classmate had heard what the man in the yellow shirt had said. He was panicking, you could hear it in his voice. Yeonwoo said that there were no rats in the corridor at the time. He asked if Isuri had noticed anything, but the girl behaved calmly, did not even turn to her classmate, and said that they would never say that they let an infected person into the shelter, so they made up another reason. But Yeonwoo panicked further. He asked if Isuri had also seen a person who had absolutely no contact with the virus suddenly turn into a zombie monster. Jeonwoo continued, his eyes wide. He hypothesized that perhaps some people did not convert immediately. It was something like an incubation period. Isuri had not yet returned to her classmate. She asked him calmly if he wanted to tell everyone present about it. There was a touch of irony in her words and voice. It seemed that she did not take Jeonwoo's experience as something significant. She went on to say that there was no point in doing so, because the workers would dismiss it as something that was ridiculous. She added that a dumb guy like Jeonwoo would say something like that. These words really hurt my classmate. His expression changed dramatically. He had trusted Isura in vain. Yeonwoo turned away from the girl and said there was no point in explaining anything to her, adding that he shouldn't have spoken to Isuri at all. She had just lost his trust. She was beginning to realize that she should have been more careful what she said. The situation had to be rectified if she wanted Jeonwoo to tell her about his hand. Suddenly she called out to a classmate. Her voice sounded more friendly. Jeonwoo turned toward the sound. Suddenly Isuri stood up and looked at Yeonwoo menacingly. The boy did not know what to expect from his classmate. Then the girl threw her charger to Jeonwoo. She briefly and exhaustively told him to take it. It scared him a little, and surprised him at the same time. He could not have expected this from his classmate Isuri. The guy looked up at the girl and asked if she would lend him her charger. His expression was quite surprised. He still did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, Yeonwoo thanked Isura for the charger, but the girl gave him her middle finger and turned around and left in silence. Ham Seong-yu overheard their conversation and shouted after Isuri, asking if he could also borrow her charger for himself. But the girl did not respond to her classmate, so he continued to shout at her and asked if she could hear him. Meanwhile, Yeonwoo was silently watching this situation with his mouth open. He looked quite surprised. He quickly reached the nearest power outlet and plugged his cell phone into the charger. Jeonwoo couldn't remember the last time he had used his phone. Ever since he had been in the vault, his cell phone had been dormant. Finally, he saw his phone turn on and light up to show that it was charging. Now he could contact his parents and see what was going on in the classroom group chat. The guy looked at the black screen of his smartphone and saw his reflection. For a second, he caught himself thinking that he could live without his phone all day and not feel lonely. Yeonwoo stared at his locked phone screen and thought about what Isuri had done. The girl's behavior was quite unusual for him. The guy started to remember school. He realized that he had never talked to her in class. The girl always sat alone, on the first desk, like any excellent student. Yeonwoo recalled a school project. He was paired with his best friend Kim Jubin, and Isuri was in a group with two other girls, and they had to work on a joint project. Even then, the girl was always stone-faced and did not reveal her emotions, except for excess and pride. When her classmates told her that the teacher had put them together to work on a project, Isuri simply said a curse word and added that she was in pain. She was not exactly friendly. Back then, Yeonwoo noticed that his classmates' behavior was not very pleasant. He remembered overhearing a conversation about Isuri being a wild queen. And he wasn't the only one who thought she was unfriendly in the classroom at the time. When he remembered this, he thought to himself that he knew that his classmates were saying all sorts of unpleasant things about Isuri behind her back. Finally, Yeonwoo returned to reality and thought about everything he remembered about his school days. He was quite upset by these memories, but he began to better understand the behavior of his classmate Isuri. Suddenly, Jeonwoo thought that maybe the girl wasn't as bad as he thought she was. Then women came into the room and the guy overheard their conversation, because she caught him from the first phrase. Jeonwoo turned toward the sound. It was a group of 3 women discussing something, probably some gossip about the vault and the people in it. The women discussed what they had heard quite loudly and emotionally. One of them called the lady in the blue t-shirt too naive after what she had told them. The lady in the center with the hat on her head told the woman in the blue t-shirt to repeat what she had just told them. She reiterated that the people who came with her to the shelter said that there was already someone here who was immune to the frog egg virus. At this point, Yeonwoo perked up his ears and listened intently to the women. Then they began to discuss the people they had come to the shelter with. The woman in the blue t-shirt continued that the person who told her the rumor was good at catching monsters and loved to help people. At first, she didn't believe it either and thought it was nonsense. But they, the people who came with them, said that they saw a person who was immune to the frog egg virus. Jeonwoo listened to the conversation very carefully. His heart was beating faster and faster as what he was hearing caused him to panic. The women said that the infected boy was fine. even though he had touched the frog egg virus. The lady in the blue t-shirt went on to say that the infected man took her hand firmly and said something to her. All the other listeners were shocked by the story. But, unfortunately, she didn't have time to finish. Some guy interrupted her at the most interesting part. A young man with dark hair and a frightening smile interrupted and said that if he was in danger, God would tell him. His words sounded rather strange and alarming. Jong-woo watched what was happening closely. The women began to speak in favor of religion, and someone recommended that they go to church more often. The conversation stopped making sense. Meanwhile, the man continued to charge his phone and waited for it to turn on. The women went back to talking about the man who was immune to the frog egg virus. One of them offered to go to him, as he was a volunteer in the aid department. Jong-woo could not come to his senses. The phrase immunity kept running through his head. He could not believe what he had just heard. This conversation was making him panic and feel anxious in the background. He had to find out more about this man. Suddenly, Jong-woo didn't notice anyone approaching him because his thoughts and mind were elsewhere. It seemed to be the pious man who had recommended that he go to church more often. The teenager was a little scared because of what he heard, because he was flying in his mind. The man called out to him, and Jong-woo turned toward the sound. It turned out that it was the bus driver who had abandoned the boys' classmates to their fate. If he was here, then Honmi and the other girls who had managed to get on the bus must have been in the shelter. The man turned to Jong-woo and asked for help. He asked the guy to borrow a charger. He probably wanted to call his daughter Jinyo. The man sounded very friendly, but something in his voice didn't sound right. However, Jong-woo was in no hurry to give him the charger and asked him again what the man needed. The guy started shaking his head to the side and saying that she was not here. He seemed to be looking for Isuri. Meanwhile, Jong-woo called his mom. His phone was finally charged. The guy still lent the charger to the bus driver and decided to call everyone at that time so that they would not worry about him. He told his mother that he was still in the shelter. He added that it would take some time before he could get out of Seoul. Jong-woo said that his parents should return to Chonan if possible, because there was no point in waiting for their son. Moreover, it was dangerous. With that, he said goodbye to his parents. The bus driver overheard his conversation. He asked if he was right to think that Jong-woo's parents were far away, but the boy did not answer. He silently turned to the man and looked at him with a slightly surprised look that expressed slight dissatisfaction. The bus driver noticed this and said that he overheard him talking and added an apology at the end. It seems that he had manners after all. Jong-woo was a friendly teenager, so he said it was no big deal. He explained that he was stuck here because of a field trip, and his parents were visiting, so they were worried sick. The man sympathized with the boy and suggested that it must have been difficult for them to get to this place. The bus driver added that Jong-woo must have been worried about his parents, just as they were worried about their son. The man's voice was completely sad. He looked like he was about to start a sob story about his daughter and how he wanted to play with her. And so it happened. The bus driver said that he also has a daughter, and if he were in the same situation as Jong-woo's parents, he would have immediately gone to Seoul to save her. It is a pity that he did not want to save other children. Jong-woo did not understand the sad and more depressing motive in the man's voice, so he just nodded in response. But the bus driver did not stop. He continued to tell poor Jong-woo about his problems. He said that his daughter had been sick since she was a little girl. Jong-woo stood there silently, not knowing how to react or what to say. But fortunately or unfortunately, the bus driver was not about to let him speak. He told him that his daughter Jinyo had been hospitalized, even though she was only 9 years old. The man wanted to hear support from a teenager he didn't know. He seemed to be very lonely. Suddenly, the bus driver came to his senses and realized that he had been playing too much. So he apologized to Jong-woo and closed the subject. But suddenly, the teenager also opened up to him. He told him that he had also been very sick when he was little. The bus driver's eyes widened at what he heard. Jong-woo continued to tell me that he waited every day for his mother to return from work in the hospital room. His gaze was downward. It looked like he was sad to remember this. Suddenly, he turned to the man and looked directly into his eyes. Jong-woo supported the driver and said that his daughter would definitely get better. The man laughed merrily after saying that, and said that the guy not only lent him the charger, but also encouraged him and gave him hope. Suddenly, The bus driver changed the subject to the excursion Yeonwoo was talking about. The man said he had heard about it from children who had fled Namsan. He asked again if Yeonwoo had come to Seoul. Suddenly, the boy's heart beat fast. He heard familiar words. It could not be a coincidence. The children the bus driver was talking about were his classmates. But the man did not continue this topic. His attention turned to the call from his phone. The driver's face changed dramatically. A wide smile appeared on his face, and his eyes widened with joy. He told Yeonwoo that it was his daughter who called him. The bus driver thanked the boy and said that he would return the favor. But he didn't specify what kind of kindness. The man abruptly stood up and walked away, happily talking on the phone with his Jinyo, leaving Yeonwoo alone with his thoughts. The boy looked at the man and was in a stupor. Later, he had to find him and ask him about these children who were going on a field trip to Namsan. Yeonwoo headed into the crowd to find his classmates, including Isuri, to return her charger. The boy's mind was still filled with thoughts of the man who was immune. Yeonwoo thought that he might have been able to get a better idea of the pain in his arm if he had met the man. He remembered that he had to look for the emergency room. Suddenly, when the teenager looked up, he saw his classmate Isuri sitting on her phone. Yeonwoo went to her. The guy thanked her for the charger a little uncertainly and stammering and handed it to her. The girl didn't even turn to him. Suddenly, Isuri ignored Yeonwoo's words and asked him if he had seen anything. The boy's face was frightened because he expected aggression from his classmate, as he had after their last conversation. Instead, the girl turned to him and said that someone had sent him a message in their class group chat. She showed it to Yeonwoo. It was written by Kang Ji-hoon, the headman. He wrote that their company, which consisted of Seo-young, Kang Min, and a soldier, was near Namsan and hiding from a monster that was chasing them. He asked if anyone could help them. Yeonwoo read it and could not believe his eyes. His heart was beating wildly at the thought that So-young was alive. Although he was very angry with her, his feelings were stronger than anger. The boy's eyes widened greatly. He was overwhelmed with hope to see his beloved again, because she was next to Namsan. It was close enough. The story switched to the company that the bus driver had betrayed and left on the road. Kang Ji-hoon shouted out happily that he finally had a connection and could contact his classmates. Kang Min was also excited about this and started to pull out his phone to contact the others. But in any case, they had no idea what to do next. The company was hiding at a gas station. Behind the glass was a huge zombie monster that looked like a giant spider. It turned out that it was Gimson the cat. He was stalking the company and sensing his victims. They were looking through the glass at what was happening outside. The company had no idea what to do next or how to escape. The events shifted back a few hours, when they were running away from the cats that attacked them after the bus driver betrayed the company and drove away. They ran away as fast as they could. Fortunately, the zombie cats did not have time to infect anyone. The first thing they saw on their way to take cover was a mini-market. So without hesitation, the company decided to hide in it. The headman, Kang Ji-hoon, ran up first and started opening the door to go inside, while the soldier made sure that no monster followed him. Seo-young and Kang Min just looked away, but unfortunately the door was locked. It looked like no one was inside, so the company had to quickly find another shelter before the zombie monsters caught up with them, although Kang Ji-hoon wanted to break down the door. Meanwhile, Kang Min spotted a gas station nearby where they could hide. It was very close, so the company had time. The boy told his classmate Kang Ji-hoon that if he broke the door, they would not be able to hide in the mini-market from the monsters. He suggested that they should hide in a gas station instead. The company had already started to leave, but Kang Ji-hoon offered to break down the door anyway and just take the food. But they talked him out of it. They left and didn't notice that someone was still inside the mini-market. Suddenly, the starosta turned around and noticed something strange that caught his attention. He carefully examined the floor of the convenience store. Something on it seemed rather strange to him. Some food was scattered on the floor. So, someone was inside and most likely covered themselves with chairs to prevent the monsters from getting inside. But Kang Ji-hoon ran after the others and didn't bother to find out what was in that strange mini-market. Kang Min ran first and said that they needed to get to the building as soon as possible. The events moved forward a few hours again, where Kang Min and Kang Ji-hoon were looking out for zombie monsters outside. They saw a cat that looked more like a giant spider. Luckily, the zombie monster didn't notice them and just walked around. The company also recognized the monster as Gimson the cat, who was the favorite of their rescuer, their grandmother. The soldier started telling me terrible things. He said that when they were running away, the man clearly saw that one of the cats that had been set on fire had survived. It seemed to be him. The cat was at the end of the gang, so the fire did not reach him. He looked so powerful and invincible then. It inspired fear in the military. Suddenly, something worse happened. The cat reached the corpses of other cats and stopped. The man felt that something very strange was about to happen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The cat started to release its white tentacles and merged with the corpses of other cats, turning into one big zombie monster. Everyone was scared when they heard this information. After all, when a cat merges with other corpses, it is not so scary, but a human monster could do it, and it would be much more dangerous. The cat seemed to sense that they were talking about him and looked at the gas station door and growled. The military man saw this and said that the zombie monsters were stronger than they had imagined and thought. Suddenly, the zombie cat opened its big, ugly jaw and growled. It seemed to notice the company behind the glass. Luckily, it was over. The cat turned away from the glass door and walked on. Kang Ji-hoon asked what it was and why the zombie monster was looking back like that. Suddenly, the soldier's expression changed dramatically. He began to understand the behavior of the zombie cat. The man came up with the hypothesis that the cat was trying to find them in this way. The zombie monster was indeed constantly looking around, as if searching for victims. He felt that they were somewhere nearby, because he was no longer chasing anyone. The military man said that if the cat followed them to the gas station and stopped, it meant that this zombie monster had a pretty strong sense of smell. Apparently, the zombie had skills from the victim it inhabited. But fortunately, the room was completely saturated with gasoline and various oils that had a pungent odor. So the soldier offered to wait inside until the zombie monster left them alone. Kang Ji-hoon and the soldier sat in the corners. Kang Min looked out the window and kept an eye on the situation. The starosta was obsessively trying to do something on his phone. It turned out that he was calling Hanma. The guy was very worried about what happened to her after that vile bus driver hit her in the face. But instead of the familiar voice of his classmate, Kang Ji-hoon heard an answering machine saying that the phone number he was calling was temporarily out of service. Kang Ji-hoon was unable to contain his emotions and swore out loud. The boy told his friend Kang Min that she did not pick up the phone. His classmate asked him who he was talking about. Kang Ji-hoon was very upset and scared. He had no choice but to write to the class chat to ask if someone could contact Hong Mi or call Hannah and Minju, as they were also on the bus. Suddenly, the guy could not stand it and screamed loudly in a mat, holding his head with his hands. His shouting attracted Kang Min's attention. Even a friend would not have expected such behavior from the elder Kang Ji-hoon. He swore that he would kill the damn bus driver if he caught him. The guy wanted revenge for Honmi. It seems that he really cared about the girl. Kang Ming looked at his friend, who was shouting at the top of his voice how angry he was, and thought of something to say to support him. The boy recalled that Kang Ji-hoon himself had told him that even if the bus left, everything would still be fine. He ironically added that he was angry now, and it turns out that he didn't believe his own words. Kang Min had a smile on his face. But Kang Ji-hoon looked down at his friend and said in an angry voice that he was angry for the wrong reason. His gaze was very confident, but Kang Min didn't believe him and laughed right in his face. He said that when the bus left, Kang Ji-hoon's mind was blown. It seems that his friend was hinting that someone was very much in love. Suddenly, Headmaster Kang Ji-hoon stood up abruptly and walked toward the door, shouting angrily from behind him for his friend Kang Min to leave him alone. But his classmate ignored his fake anger and added that Kang Ji-hoon's behavior only proved Kang Min's truthfulness. The headman opened the door and left the room where they were all sitting. Kang Min asked him where he was going. Did he really want to escape the conversation so badly? Kang Ji-hoon told him to go to hell and said that he wanted to look for some food because he was very hungry. The guy walked into the other room slowly, looking around. The chairs were upside down and the table was a mess. Kang Ji-hoon reached out to open one of the top drawers. He hoped that there would be some food in there, but instead, He just swore loudly that there was no food in it again. It seemed that this was not the first drawer. Had the people who worked here left no crumbs behind? Kang Ji-hoon thought for a second. A situation was running through his mind. He couldn't control his emotions and keep from thinking about it. The guy remembered the moment when a lousy, disgusting bus driver beat his beautiful and innocent Hanmi. How she screamed and cried in pain. That raghead was hitting the teenager with all his might. Kang Ji-hoon's eyes were filled with anger. He couldn't contain his emotions. He wanted revenge right here and now. He had to get to the vault to find that bastard and pay him back. The guy remembered his girlfriend's crying face and busted lip again, and with the anger that had been building up inside him all this time, he slammed the closet door. Suddenly, he heard the voice of a soldier from behind him, so he turned to the sound. The man was telling Kang Ji-hoon to break down all the doors. He was obviously saying it with irony. After that, he added instructively that if the guy was angry, he should go to the corner and get angry there. The soldier continued and asked if Kang Ji-hoon had forgotten about the monster that was looking for them outside. Surprisingly, the starosta didn't say anything, although he could have and wanted to start a fight. Perhaps then he would have released all his aggression, but the boy remained silent. Kang Ji-hoon simply turned around and wanted to leave the room, as he realized that the soldier was not going to leave. Suddenly, he was stopped by a man's question. He asked if all this behavior and aggression was because of that girl. Although the soldier did not mention her name, they both understood who he was talking about. Kang Ji-hoon turned sharply to the man and looked at him with an angry look in his eyes. The soldier was invading his privacy, even though Kang Ji-hoon didn't look like a person who liked to share anything personal. But the man wasn't afraid of him, so he asked if they had been close before, including in middle school. He remembered Hanmi telling him this. Kang Ji-hoon guessed that such precise facts could not be a hypothesis through observation. So he asked the soldier if it was Hong-mi who told him that they had been close. But the man was silent. He stood with his back to the boy and said nothing. So Kang Ji-hoon wanted to justify himself somehow and said that everyone was close to her, hinting that she was just that kind of person and had good communication with everyone. The guy continued to justify himself, but was unable to finish. The soldier interrupted him because he did not want to listen to this deception. He asked directly if the two of them had met before. This question caused Kang Ji-hoon's face to change dramatically, and without his answer, it was clear that the soldier had hit the nail on the head with his question. The man casually opened the door of a cabinet and wanted to take something out, making a rather long pause in their conversation, making it clear that Kang Ji-hoon would have to answer his questions. But the guy was silent, so the soldier bluffed and said that Hanmi had told him when they were making Molotov cocktails together. The man suddenly imagined these memories. He just asked if they were close. The girl was very nervous and answered yes, but then added that she had dated Kang Ji-hoon until middle school. The guy turned pale from this information, and drops of sweat ran down his face. It was obvious that he was embarrassed that the military man knew about it. Kang Ji-hoon replied that it didn't mean anything and it wasn't his business anyway. The guy was acting quite stupid, but that was because he had nothing to say. He was cornered. But the soldier's response surprised him. He said that he only wanted to help him. At this phrase, Kang Ji-hoon's pupils dilated and his eyebrows rose to his forehead. The man turned to look at his friend and added that he would help him find his so-called girlfriend or girlfriend. Meanwhile, So-yeon sat in the room and watched through the glass what was happening outside. Suddenly, someone handed her a hot drink in a paper cup from a vending machine. He offered So-yeon a drink. That someone was Kang Min. He scared the girl a little. She still couldn't get used to what had been happening to her all these days. The guy said that there was instant coffee. This gesture of kindness made the girl happy. She hadn't eaten for a long time and a hot drink was perfect at that moment. A smile appeared on her face. Kang Min wanted to talk to his classmate. He asked her what she saw through the glass and then added whether she was afraid of the cats. The question was quite strange, but Seo-young realized that the boy was just looking for an excuse to talk. But the girl's mood was quite pessimistic. She was looking down. Her gaze was very sad, as if something had been weighing her down all this time, some obsessive thought. She started talking about something she wanted to do. It was clear from her voice that So-yeon was up to no good. She said that she was a burden to her friends, especially since she was wounded. But the guy didn't let her finish and interrupted her. He said it was enough that they were already together. Kang Min asked if her thought was because of Kang Ji-hoon. He told Seo Young not to listen to the headman. The girl was silent. It was obvious that her classmates' words did not encourage her much, and she kept thinking about her stupid idea. Kang Ming noticed this mood and had to quickly think of something else to cheer up. He said that anytime she was in a fight, she had a hammer with her. But Seo Young didn't understand what Kang Min was talking about, so he smiled and reminded her of the hammer he had given her on the bus. This brought a smile to the girl's face. It seems that Kang Min managed to cheer the girl up and improve her mood. The girl abruptly opened her purse and quickly started looking for something in it. And then she took out a small red hammer and showed it to Kang Min. Seo Young's expression became kinder and gentler. He was like that in school. She laughed and said that fighting with that hammer was like committing suicide. Kang Min was also amused by this phrase and said that Seo Young was holding it wrong. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon came up to them and silently watched what was happening. He interrupted the fun of his classmates and said that he thought Kang Min was watching over their safety from the outside, but it turned out that he was talking nonsense. Seo Young's face changed dramatically, and it was clear that she didn't like the headmaster. Kang Min sensed this and realized that he had to support his friend, because she was already suffering from what Kang Ji-hoon had said to her earlier. He whispered to Seo Young to remember that if she listened to the headman, she would become a failure like him. Ji-hoon heard this and was outraged, but Kang Min abruptly changed the subject and said that he recalled that Kang Ji-hoon had written to the group's chat room and asked if anyone had replied to his message. But by the look on Kang Ji-hoon's face, he realized that something was wrong with the group. There was an air of anger about him. Park Min answered the boy and called him a freak. He was indignant that the chief had left Yeonwoo alone on the cable car. He called Ji-hoon an asshole and said that the boy shouldn't have done that. Park Min also added that Kim Jubin had sacrificed himself and died to save Yeonwoo. Kang Ji-hoon shouted to the others and told them to read the message from Park Min. So Young and Kang Min quickly pulled out their phones and opened a group chat. Soyeon's face changed dramatically. Her heart beat faster. She was overjoyed to hear the news because it meant that Yeonwoo had survived and she didn't have to blame herself so much for running away. Ham Song-yu added that he and Yeonwoo were in hiding. He asked if their company was now in Namsan and asked if it was revenge. Headmaster Kang Ji-hoon asked out loud if Ham Song-yu wanted to die. He was very angry and did not understand what the two classmates were talking about, although Seo Young had repeatedly reminded him that they had indeed betrayed Yeonwoo and left him for dead. The boy almost miraculously survived. Suddenly, they heard a sound from outside. All three of them looked up to see what had happened. They heard someone screaming. The scream seemed to be coming from a convenience store. Kang Min was the first to ask what was going on. Kang Ji-hoon mentioned that he heard strange sounds of a box falling as they tried to get inside. The teenagers saw people running out of the mini-market. There were a lot of them. They were running and screaming as if someone was inside. Maybe it was a zombie monster. Soyeon was very scared because she didn't want to run away from anyone again, and these people could run to them and bring a monster with them. Suddenly, a large zombie monster ran out of the convenience store, breaking the glass. It seems that one of those people was infected and became a monster. The teenagers saw people running straight to their gas station. Kang Ji-hoon was unhappy that the crowd was running straight to them. A guy was the first to arrive at the gas station door. He began to break down the door and apologize. So they hadn't opened the company's door on purpose, and now they wanted to take shelter of them themselves. The man was screaming like crazy and apologizing. He swore that they were going to open the door for them, but the company had already left. He begged them to let the teenagers open the door for them, but their classmates were not going to open the door to them right away. Kang Ji-hoon told them not to, because the monsters were coming from the mini-market, so some of them could be infected. On the other hand, if a zombie monster caught them now, the teenagers would have several times more enemies. The man who was running last realized they weren't going to open the door, so he took a chair that was standing at the entrance. He shouted that the teenagers had decided they were the owners of the store. He did not like the behavior of the company, because he had behaved like this a few hours earlier towards these teenagers. The man swung a blue chair and was about to break down the door. He was being very selfish. After all, breaking the door would not have saved them from the zombie monsters, but then everyone would be in danger. Suddenly, a soldier ran to the teenagers. He ordered everyone to run away from the window quickly because the glass could hurt them. But the man still did not understand what was happening. When he ran closer, he saw this horrible picture. His eyes were filled with incomprehension. He did not know who those people were and why they wanted to break down the door. Suddenly, the soldier saw something that scared him. A zombie cat stood behind the gang, intent on kicking in the door. The man with the blue chair didn't notice the monster and continued to threaten to kick in the door if they didn't open it. Suddenly, he heard growling sounds behind him. This made him abandon the idea of breaking the glass. The robber turned to see who was growling. He already knew in his head that he was in danger. Like this, the zombie monster opened its huge mouth. It was about to attack the man and their entire company. It seems that they had never encountered monsters before, because the zombie cat immediately attacked him and let loose its white tentacles, knocking the robber to the ground.